What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a little bit different. I'm working on my street bike today, so I kind of missed the beginning part of this video. I wasn't going to film it, but then I got into it and it ended up being a much bigger problem than I originally expected. So this is about halfway through, so this is going to be mostly like reinstall, but I talk through it in a way that kind of explains how to do it in the reverse order if you're first taking it apart and then putting it back together. So this is for a carbon fiber rear fender on my 2005 CBR600RR. Enjoy. Okay, so I just got this carbon fiber rear fender cowl for my bike, and I wanted to make a video of some of the issues that I've had installing it, because it's a bit different than the normal plastic one that comes on your bike. Because of its rigidity, it's a lot harder to fit over this back piece. So I didn't film all the beginning of this, all the first parts, but I wanted to start here and kind of tell you guys what I've done, because it's actually been a much more extensive process than what you would normally do just to install that back fender piece. So on the stock fender, or this one is aftermarket, but it's same material, ABS plastic, it's much more flexible. So you can really flex these two parts out to get them out around this plastic under fender piece that's on the bike. That's also like the battery tray there, which I had to actually cut off parts here to be able to get the new carbon fiber piece on, because this is way more rigid, because this is a hard material, so it doesn't flex nearly as good, and I don't want to break it. So there was literally no way to get it to fit, and it wasn't even close. So I actually went in here with a Dremel and trimmed all of this off back to here, and likewise on the other side. It's not really necessary. It just, when the fender's on, it fits in there better. This creates a little bit more of a gap, but in order to get the fender over and on, I had to trim these, because there was no way of flexing that carbon fiber to get it on. So normally on the 2005 CBR600s, there's these 4 bolts here under the passenger seat, and then you take off the 2 bolts on the driver's seat, and then you can basically take off the rear fender. But then once you do that, I ended up removing this whole black plastic bit here. So there was a couple bolts here, a couple bolts here, and then there's some screws down in here that hold the under panel together, and then some plastic clips way up in here that I ended up just breaking out because there was no way to get to them. And then I had to undo all the wiring here that comes through, and this main fuse box I unplugged so I could get the wires out of this hole that you can see right here. So I had that all pulled out. I just rewired it back in, and then I decided that this is probably a good time to make a video, and it probably makes a lot of sense because there's literally no other videos of this on YouTube, or I couldn't find anything about this installing this carbon fiber piece. So yeah, long story short, I basically undid all this wiring, pulled it all out, and then pulled this black plastic piece out of the bike and trimmed these. I guess you could probably do it on the bike, but originally I had pulled it out just in hopes that I could fit the carbon fiber fender on with this off of the bike, but it still wasn't working. So I trimmed this off, reinstalled it, rerouted some of the wires, and now I'm just gonna continue to get everything plugged back in the right spots and bolted back in, and I'll take you through the rest of the installation process of that. So I've gone ahead and got this back on and all lined up in the proper position. You have to tuck the front under this piece here, and there's 2 little tabs that go under there. So Once you do that, then there's a couple spots. Like right here is where a screw goes, right here, and then there's one there and one back there. These are all rusted, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace them with some new hardware. So that's all I'm gonna be doing right now, is just screwing these in and getting them hooked up. And basically, so they go down under here, and this might be different on your bike, but on mine, it came this way, but I have a Fender Eliminator bracket that bolts right into underneath the battery tray down here. So that's where those bolts come out, and there's 3 of them. So then through the front hole in front of the battery tray, you're going to have this long Phillips head with a washer and a nut on the bottom that are going to go down through that hole right there. Once I got these 3 bolts in, as well as that one up there, I went ahead and mounted my license plate bracket. So right here there's 1, 2, and then 3 back here. And that's all that holds that on. Now I have an LED light here, so I'm gonna have to run this up and plug it back in up here. And then, you know, deal with some of this other wiring too. But we're making steps, so that's where I'm at now. So I got my license plate light wire run back up and plugged into the wiring harness here, as well as my other blinker and my taillight plug. So that's all run. Oop, that just fell. Okay, so one of the things, if you do want to remove this plastic shroud, one of the things is this harness of wires here. Yours may be different. I'm not sure what previous owners have kind of got going on here. This looks a little crazy, maybe factory, but I don't think so. Anyway, in order to get these out so you can get the shroud off, there is a hole right down here in the side that all these wires run through. And in order to get them out, you have to undo the fuse that's put on here. So it's just these 2 tabs that you press outward and pull the fuse off. So that fuse looks like this. So it's this big terminal here. So this plugs in here like that. And then on these 2 posts, you have your power and ground. Let's see right here, yeah. So you have this and this that go on them. So that gets plugged back in like that. And then there's this rubber boot here with the fuse. I believe it's a spare that slides on to the bottom of this. And it has these 2 little channels to slide down over this tab here and this tab here to hold it in place. So that will go down something like, hard to do this with one hand, but something like that. So it'll sit down there. I still gotta get it over on that side, but this side's on. And then that way we can run this line and this tab here onto these 2 terminals right there. Okay, so getting those 2 terminals on this fuse box down in there is a real pain, especially because this wire is so stiff and it's hard to like angle it on there properly to get the little hex head bolt in it. But I got them both in. I'm hoping that they're on the right terminals. I'm not 100% positive which way they came off. I can't quite remember. But then I went and tucked all this stuff up in here as neatly and tidy as I can. Like I said, I don't know if you guys will have all this if you're doing this on your bike, but I do on mine, and I'm not going to cut some stuff and try to clean it up nicer with less connectors, but because I'd rather it just worked, and it's been working, so just going to roll with that. So that's pretty much all done up. I have this power and ground right here that I have to take care of, this ground here, and then a power and ground for my street glow. So I think next we'll drop the battery in and then get those all hooked up and then test the battery before I go any further with tidying up any of these wires or putting the rest of the fairing on. I want to make sure that the bike, all the lights work and the bike will turn on and everything. So, okay, so battery is back in. Kind of crazy mess of wires, but did my best to tidy those up. Now I'm going to replace this bracket that goes here and the one that goes here. So let's see. This one goes right here. And then, actually this one goes here. And then I have the other one to go here, but I gotta get the bolt that fell on the floor first. And then try to get these in with one hand without dropping any other ones. Okay, I got those two. Okay, got all those. And then this is the bracket that has the key lock for your back seat or passenger seat. So that goes right here. There's 4 bolts, 2 on either side with the tabs here for your seat that have to line up with the holes. So I'm gonna get these bolted in and then we'll go from there. Okay, so since I didn't get to show you taking this apart and I'm showing you everything, putting it back together, the reason I took this off was to get to that bolt down there, and then there's 2 plastic pins that hold the plastic shroud on down there. So I had to take this off to gain a little bit more access, even though at the end of the day I couldn't get really to those 2 little plastic screws, so I ended up cutting them from the bottom and ripping them out. So now what I'm going to do as I'm reinstalling, I'm going to put push pins in up from the bottom of the bike, so that way if I ever need to take them out again, I can just pull them out from the bottom rather than from the top here, because it's almost impossible to get to them this way. So that's why I took that off. This piece, I guess I probably didn't even need to take it off to remove this, because I think it just screws this metal bracket onto this plastic. I don't think it goes into the frame or anything like that. Maybe these ones do, but I'm not entirely sure. But since I didn't show you taking this off, the 2 bolt holes that have this bigger nut on them go towards the front of the bike, and those are what you screw the rear fender fairing to. And then these 2 with the brackets, as you can see in this orientation, those are so that way the rear seat can lock in. So then those go behind, these go behind these front ones. So tighten these down, and then likewise with this, it's just 2 bolts. I took this off thinking that I had to take it off to get this piece off, but again, I don't think you do. Anyway, those are just 2 hex head bolts that go in there, and this is the 3rd mounting point for the rear passenger seat. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten all these down, and then we'll move on. Quick correction on these, they do bolt into the frame. There's a little aluminum post that comes up on both sides with 2 holes, and yeah, these do bolt in directly to the frame. So this is necessary to remove if you're taking off the plastic undershroud. So now it's time, I think, to start tidying up all this wiring that's run up the side of the bike and to the back over here. I got a bunch of zip ties, so I'm gonna like group the wires together as best I can, fold them over where necessary, where they're too long. Like a lot of this right here can just be like kind of wrapped up and then zip tied together. And then this blinker light over here is gonna get zipped through that hole and then tucked up over here and zip tied again. So I'm just gonna tidy all this up and I'll show you what it looks like once it's done. Okay, so a lot of time later, I zip tied this here to the frame, this down here to the frame. Also, right here is a little plastic shroud piece that connects to the main shroud that we've been talking about, that just covers these wires here as they come out of the hole that I've pointed out a couple times now. So don't forget to reinstall that because it'll help keep moisture out and anything that sprays up from the wheel and anything like that. So then we went ahead and zip tied the whole bundle here, and then I drilled a little hole in the plastic to run a zip tie through to kind of bundle that big mess up there. Then you go up here and I zip tied this blinker wire to this little tab right there. And now I'm just going to trim off all the extra pieces of the zip ties. And then I'm trying to think of what the next step is. I think the next step, I have to put the two little pins in for this piece here that connects to the rest of the shroud. So there's two, I'm not sure if you guys can see, but there's two holes up there that connect it. So I gotta put two pins in there, and then I think it's Fender installation time. Okay, so the next thing I'm gonna do before I install a Fender is put the little vents in here. So as you can see, there's a hole there and a hole there. So there's two holes on both sides. I already went ahead and mounted this one. So I had to go and tap these holes. So I tapped them for a M4 by 10 size bolt, and I already installed this vent here. So as you can see, there it is installed. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the other one here on the other side, and using these little screws here. So there we go. Now we have both of the vents installed, and now we can throw this on the bike. So if you're curious as to what this whole thing is about, and the reason that I cut this black plastic piece down in the first place, is because as you can see, the width of this fender literally like isn't nearly wide enough to fit over this. So I had to cut it down so that way, you know, you can get one side over and angle it, and then get the other side over like that. What I'm realizing now is I am gonna have to go back and take one of these seat posts off, because to angle this to get it on properly, it's hard to show you guys, but to angle this to get it on properly over this edge, it's hitting that right there. So I'm gonna pop that side off, try and get this on, and then I'll have to reinstall that, which is fine because this is a big open hole for the back seat, so I should have access to that, no problem. So I'll update you in a few seconds. Okay, so after a bunch of pulling and prying, I got it on, and it was impossible for me to videotape it and show you at the same time. So what I had to do was I grabbed this bottom edge under here and I pulled it out as far as I could to like the verge of like I could hear the clear coat on the carbon like starting to crack in certain places, and just barely pull it over. And mind you, that's after I've trimmed the black plastic on both sides of the undershroud. to accommodate this, but because it's so rigid, it literally has like no flex to it before it starts cracking. I even see some like hairline cracks in the clear coat from trying to pull this over. One thing I had to do was my nice tidy wire tuck up here. I had to trim because it was too big of a bulge of wires to get this over, and that was like the last thing that was stopping me. So all the wires are actually like tucked up in there, which is good. So I'm just gonna take these ones right here and fold them up and zip tie them and tuck them up under this corner. But it's on there. And one thing, I don't know if this is the same on every CBR600, but I have this metal plate right here that holds the blinkers. So you have to make sure that you tuck the ends up under the fairing here. Another thing that I did was I mounted the taillight before installing this, because there's 2 screws in there on either side, and once you have the fairing on there, there's literally no way to get to them. So I mounted the taillight before installing it. It's got a little bit of play right now and a slight gap here, which I'm not too pumped about, but that is the way it is, I guess. Overall, I mean, I think the carbon looks super awesome, but if I knew it was this big of a job to do and this difficult to install it, I don't think I would probably do it again. So if it wasn't for my other one getting burnt and the clips broke off, I probably wouldn't have done this. It's also like a really expensive piece, but yeah, so now I'm just gonna get it bolted down, put the seats back on, and then I'll show you once it's all back together. Okay, so there's 4 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4. So these ones are shorter and have a little step in them, and these ones are longer but skinnier. And make sure when you tighten these down, you don't go too tight. There's no reason to over tighten it. This thing is on here solidly, and you don't want to crack it. So just go until they're nice and tight. These ones should actually bottom out without putting any or too much pressure on the actual fairing piece. They'll bottom out and just sit here, so this can't move at all. One thing to remember is that when you put this side panel back on, it has to go underneath the edge here and then come up and over this. And then you'll put a push pin in here and a bolt in here, and then there's a little push button here. It's like a rubber grommet, and this has a peg on it. So I'll show you on the other one. So it looks like that, and it just goes in the rubber grommet. And now the way that this connects onto here is these little tabs that you can see there, and they go up in a slot and slide backward. And then right here, this part of the plastic here goes underneath the fairing, and then there should be one more push pin hole right there. And then you just do the same thing on the other side, which I'm not going to show because it's tight against the wall. So I'm just going to install that, and then we'll put the seats back on. Okay, so seats are back on. One thing to note is that there's 2, one there and one there, bolts that go in to hold this seat on. This one just has the 2 clips there and the back clips, so the whole thing just slides forward and latches down. And then you got to pull the key out. But yep, put these 2 bolts in, and then she's all done. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Let me know down below if you have any questions about anything specific or if I missed or skipped over anything. So besides that, have a great day. Stay tuned.